Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Cycle Smart Solutions for Cycling podcast. We are pretty excited about the reception of the podcast, and I want to start by saying thanks. As I've said before, this is a thing we threatened to do for a long time, and I'm glad we're finally getting around to doing it. And as we hoped, letting everybody essentially eavesdrop on our weekly coaching calls has turned out to be fun for us and informative for the folks who are listening. We've gotten a lot of good feedback on it, so I appreciate that a lot. I know all the other coaches do too, and we're going to try and do as many of these as we can as time allows. Today, we have 6 of us here: myself, Jacob Fetty, Al Donahue, Jordan Valella, Stephen Hyde, and Mike Vandenham. What's up, y'all?
Hey.
It is about 1 week before US Cyclocross Nationals. And as you can imagine, it is a primary topic of conversation for many of our athletes and between us as coaches. And so we thought we had just enough time to share some of the things that we've been talking about with you and hopefully make this something useful for you on your drive to nationals in the days before, to try to put all the finishing touches on your physical and mental preparation for the race and strategies around just the days before, resting, opening, how to open, when to ride the course, how to ride the course, how to treat nationals, what your mental game is, how are you calming yourself or hyping yourself, all the different ways that you can come into this and what we think is best for our athletes and hopefully for you as well. So I guess with that in mind, we can jump right in. I think one of the first things we started thinking about when we were thinking about this is just the mentality of nationals. How do we approach nationals? The psychology of peaking for nationals. And one of the first things that came up and came up again even before the call is nationals any different from any other race that you do any other time of the year? And I think you have to ask yourself that whether you're racing to win or racing to participate. Do you do anything different for nationals? Do you get hyped in a different way? Do you prepare in a different way? And if you do, what is that? And if you don't, why not? So I'll put that out to all of you to just dive into, like, when with your athletes. Let's talk about it from both perspectives, both someone who's racing for a jersey and someone who's racing for participation or experience. Is nationals more or less important than other races during the year?
That's a funny question because I think that the answer is so clearly twofold. When you're sitting there and planning your season, it's probably yes. When you're working with your coach and making your ATP, right? You might be building an arc that goes towards nationals, but when you're actually a couple weeks out or even a day out from that event, as an athlete and as a coach, I think that the messaging very clearly needs to be, no, it's another race. Do what you do, right? And as an athlete, I got myself into trouble my first few elite years trying to win a title because I did treat it as a bigger race and everything was magnified. Every mistake in the race was magnified in a way that I couldn't rebound from. And then sort of part of my process as an athlete was learning how to just show up and go, you know what? This is what I am. I just need to do what I do and race this like any other race.
I think you
Yeah,
can get
anyone
in
have anything to add to
trouble.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can get in trouble when you change your routine, and the hardest thing about nationals is you put such a fine point on it. You can change your routine and think you're saving things for it, or, maybe I'll do this for this day and the secret sauce will come out, but it should be the same process that you used every race and just executing that process every time. You've been in a flow all
Yeah.
season, so why change it?
Do you think that there's sometimes, or I guess the question I would ask is, for most of our athletes, I guess all of our athletes, whether they're professionals or amateurs, everybody's working with a certain amount of energy and focus and motivation. And is it possible that some of those little things you wish you were doing all year long, but sort of weren't able to stay on top of, are things you're able to do a better job of when you have the the draw of nationals or the importance of nationals to give you that like extra motivation, or things you slacked on you can kind of tighten up in the last 6 weeks or a month before nationals. It's
Yeah,
like
I
an
think
extra motivation to
I think
get everything done.
yeah, it can that can clash a little bit with the time of year too, right? I mean, like you can have all these great intentions of like, all right, my training's going to be dialed, my timing's going to be right, and then all of a sudden you get the first snow of the year. It starts getting icy out, depending on kind of where you're at. The weather starts getting a little bit harsh. Days are shorter, etc. And so, like, I think a lot of, when Mike was talking about this kind of arc towards nationals over the year, if if a lot of emphasis is put on nationals, it's very easy for an athlete to spend a lot of their bandwidth in the early part of the season thinking about it, or even in the middle part. And then you get to the end where everything's actually kind of hard and everybody's tired and you don't have it. You just don't have it. Things come apart. You miss stuff. And with that extra pressure, those little missed things, that one missed workout, or having to ride indoors instead of outdoors, or not getting the right time outside, all of a sudden can like really pile up on you psychologically. And it's a great way to crack going into nationals, And I think, to be honest, like, one of the biggest gifts I was given as an athlete going into nationals, with all three of my national titles, was like absolute disaster happening right beforehand. Like, every single one of them was just such a crapshoot leading into it, and it took so much pressure off, where I was actually able to get there and just be like, okay, all right, well, what am I going to do at this point? Like,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
go do it.
Yeah.
It's, as you're talking about it, it's funny. I'm looking at the screen and everybody on the screen, and I'm realizing, not a thing that I didn't know, but it's really hitting me. Like, there's no coach in America that's coached more cyclocross national champions than Al. Mike's been Canadian national champion. Steven, you've been elite national champion. I've been masters and collegiate national champion, and road and criterium. Like, I just kind of like, I'm forgetting sometimes, but like, we really have a lot of experience around winning nationals, but also a lot of experience around just participating in nationals. Like, there were years as a professional that I had to show up at Philly fit enough to ride for the team. I was not there to win. I was never there to win. I was there to, in a sense, it was just another race, but my performance was important. And so the mentality for that, well, it was Philly, so we always still tried to be as prepared as possible. But we were excited about that, and Jacob had that experience as well. So I kind of want to like put it to Al, especially because I think he's had a lot of experience with riders putting too much emphasis on their performance, when we've all learned, and I say this to my athletes all the time, when you show up at nationals, you just have to have a normal day. And Steven, you kind of just said that. And I think that was what Al was getting at before the call, and I kind of want to hear from him on that.
Well, it was always a tough thing because with the pros, like, your season didn't matter. Your paycheck was just your nationals result. And like, if you won nationals, you had a job. If you didn't, you might not have a job next year. So that was a very different like time and kind of employment scenario, where it was very, very hard to not put an undue amount of pressure. And that pressure is the number one thing that would ruin nationals. So looking at how athletes apply pressure and kind of like perceive the situation is a critical part of nationals. I think it's the number one thing that can derail your process that's been successful all year. So how you like handle that with your coach, I think, is the biggest detail in nationals by far.
I think a really positive experience for me working with Al through national championships was, there was obviously, for everything you just said, there was a lot of emphasis on nationals. I think what we did really successfully was move a lot of our process to the racing in Europe post nationals. And I think that took a lot of that time that I would be spending thinking about my performance at nationals and put it just on the other side of it.
Mhm.
And it was just far enough on the other side of it that I could be like, okay, I can prep really well. The idea of going to Europe for me was so much different, even though the racing was harder than it would be at nationals. It was like nationals every single day. I knew I wasn't racing for a win, so the prep really was around like, how do I just get better in these races? How do I just get better at that? And it was like kind of overshooting and then landing at nationals going, oh, all that prep worked really well for this.
It was like nationals was the start of the second part of your season. I think one of the things that's hard for amateur racers is if you're going to nationals and whether you're trying to peak for it, it's still the biggest race of the season for most of us. And so when your biggest race of the season is the last race of the season, it's very challenging, right? There's a lot of senioritis, and that makes November hard. Once the time changes and you really want to be doing the best training you can do, you have worse weather and shorter days and more indoor time. And it's hard to motivate through that with nationals as your goal. And you see like the numbers drop off in the local races once the time changes through Thanksgiving. And it's a miracle if people make it to December.
I think a key
Yeah.
part to peaking for nationals, like if you're not excited to race for a month after nationals, you can't peak well because you're on fumes and you're cracked and like you're just trying to fake that last one big event. But if you're not motivated to race for another month and excited for that and have been kind of planning for that follow through, I think it's very hard to have like you're not really in a good spot to be at your best physically or mentally.
I agree 100% there. I've been working with my athletes to fill in different buckets. We talk about the Stoke bucket, the, family bucket, and then the training bucket. And the training bucket can suffer around this time, but if you fill the other ones up and try to even out your perspective on the entire event and your output, emotionally towards it, you can have a better performance. Because trying to pull those workouts out of thin air, some people just really they're running on fumes. It's Thanksgiving, then you have this Christmas stuff happening and all the holiday stuff. It can be very taxing to pull yourself away from family and other people,
Yeah.
just to train all the time. And
I think-
so,
Right. And I think that's part of the mistake, though, when going back to Mike's initial statement about the arc going towards nationals, like that's the mistake for 99% of the people is that nationals is their race, right? And I
Yeah.
think unless you're really going for a jersey, like, again, it just needs to be a normal race, but you need to be seeking achievement throughout the entirety of the cross season, not just like, hey, like let's go to nationals, right? So therefore, you're building success along the way, and then you're working with your coach to kind of pull you back to have that bandwidth to fill between Thanksgiving and nationals. So then it's like, okay, cool, I got one more race, right? And you're excited to go do it to continue that achievement throughout the season.
And like, this isn't going to be, this is important, but maybe not as helpful for the folks who are on their drive to nationals. Because right now we're telling you about, hey, this is maybe a thing that you can do differently next year or a mistake that you made this fall. But I know for my athletes who aren't focused on nationals, the goal was to do a lot early in the season, get them fit enough that they could get to the end of the season strong. And November's a great place to get results in cross because people are cracking. And if you're still motivated in November and you've held on to some fitness, you can do well all the way to the end of the season and finish happy about it. If you're trying to go well at nationals, then there has to be some kind of rest, obviously, and a building back up in November. That is challenging to do. And you do need that extra motivation of nationals, or if you're an elite, maybe something after nationals to do that training.
And I think there's a bit of a pitfall in that kind of early beginning of the season building, where you're kind of laying out your annual training plan, where I find that the conversation often floats to when we're laying out these kind of A race, B race, C race scenarios, where we're talking like C races being really non-prioritized in terms of like we can have a lot of volume, and then B races being these practice races essentially for the A race. I think the pitfall that I often see is that a lot of people want to put multiple A races on their single season, and I think that's where you get in trouble of like putting too much pressure across the season and then you often end up kind of shooting too hard for those early, A races when you could just have one A race. It keeps the perspective on managing that bandwidth.
With USCX, front loading the season and then just sort of equally important races during the season, maybe Pan Am standing out if that's something that people are prioritizing for, you really can get yourself spread thin. And I think there is less racing now, and I do think people are skipping races to train, to try to be prepared. I think let's try to move this into like, we started by talking about like, is there a difference in our approach? And I guess if I was going to summarize this, what we're trying to say is ideally not. Yes, you want to be at your best when you show up for nationals, but you don't want to per se have done anything different. It should be your best practices, maybe just tightened up a little bit. You're being a little more careful about things because it matters a little bit more, and you have made some space to dedicate the energy to controlling the little details that you might wish you could control weekend in, week out, but maybe you let go. But it's sort of like when people say, what do you eat for breakfast on race day? Right? I always find that as an interesting question, because for me, the answer is the same thing I eat every day. There's no reason you shouldn't have that good breakfast necessarily like all the time. Why is it a special? I don't want to eat a special breakfast on race day. So at nationals, I know for me personally, like I'm going because I'm trying to win this race, and I struggle with the pressure of that being possible. And even though it's easy for me to tell my athletes, hey, you don't have to do anything special. You did the work, you did the prep, you did everything I asked you to do. I just need you to show up and ride your bike in a calm way. I really have a hard time with that. It takes a lot of practice to learn how to handle that kind of pressure and just be chill about it, and because it's a waste of energy too, right? And so when Steven says like disaster helps, having my pedals break with 2 laps to go last year, or I think just watching elite professional high paid athletes break chains in the starts or crash on the barriers, I know this is funny, but it's comforting because it makes you realize, oh, this is going to happen to someone. Every race we do, someone at nationals is going to have a disaster. You hope it's not you. You do the things to make sure it's not you. Mike, you mentioned this early in the conversation too. So you have to learn to like accept what happens and be calm about it in the way that it's no difference from a local training race with just a little more attention to detail.
And I always felt that building towards like that high pressure event, like the nationals that I won, I was the favorite going in, which has its own set of pressures that actually
challenging,
in some ways makes it harder than being the underdog.
Oh
yeah. I don't enjoy it.
And I always had to come into that by going, okay, of course the results goal, the outcome goal is to win, but I need to set up the process goals of all the little pieces that I need to do to get there, because it's too much. It's too much to think about. If I just go and the goal is winning, there's too much chaos. There's too much uncertainty. There's too much else going on. But it's like, okay, what are the little check marks I need to do? It's maybe visualize on the trainer what my start's going to look like. It's maybe when I feel myself getting off kilter and anxious in the race, have a mantra like smooth as fast. All these little things that contribute to victory without actually focusing on the victory itself.
And nationals itself
like,
is
I would go back even further, Mike, because like I think for most people, I guess everybody, nationals is the biggest show of a race they're going to go to, and that can be kind of overwhelming too. Like parking is way different, getting a tent or whatever is way different, right? And so like when you say mantra of like smooth as fast, I think there's also a real need to first identify what kind of person you are. Are you going to be visually overwhelmed and overstimulated by nationals, or are you that person's like, man, this is freaking cool, like I'm digging this? And so you almost have to have a plan before you get there, and just monitoring and managing your energy expenditure, because it can be overwhelming before you even get your number.
Well, you could
And
shake so many
even
hands before you get there. It's,
Yeah.
for me as a person that's not even racing, when I go there to meet my athletes, I run into, 20 people I know. And by the time you're done shaking hands, high five, and seeing people you haven't seen for a month or two, you look at your watch and you 5 minutes for the pre-ride window. So I
Yeah,
think
that's right.
it's overwhelming in that way, to not to schedule that day, because like Jacob was saying, there's so much more input, and I'm a person that gets distracted by that stuff. I'm there for 5 minutes and actually 100 minutes.
Right. Well,
You get it.
we want to talk to our right. It's like a convention, right? Cross Nationals is our
100%.
annual convention, and we want to talk to our friends. We want to talk to our athletes. We want to be available to people because that's why we do this job.
But then it
The
takes you
biggest
out of your
circus in town.
routine real fast.
Right,
If
but
your
you're also
routine goes
racing,
out the window.
right?
Yeah.
Like I do get a little crazy before my race, and I have to like protect the tent, and I don't like it because I can't be myself in those hours before the race. I have to like switch into some other mode. But for the athletes, and let's use this to talk about like how we help the athletes with that. Um, how do you help the athlete manage all of the excitement and all of the stress
yeah,
around the race itself? And like what, like how are we as coaches interacting with our athletes in a way that talking about it here can be helpful to people,
I
both through the week and on race day? And also, I guess if we have time, like if you're a coach who's also racing, um maybe that's not useful for everybody, but if we have time we might be able to talk about that too. But how are we helping the athletes manage their, not just race day, but let's call it race week stress, like from when you arrive at the venue?
I think one of the big challenges of a race like Nationals is you go from a routine at your local races where either you pre-ride the day before or you don't pre-ride until the day of. And all of a sudden at Nationals, you have this big, gaping, multi-day window where you can be at the course. So it all sort of starts with making a plan of like, when do you go to the venue? And just as importantly, when do you not go to the venue? Because
Right.
every single time you show up there, it's mental and physical stress. It's excitement. It's spending twice as long as you thought you'd be there. It's like, even the best plan showing up at the venue is going to take you half an hour longer than you thought it was. So maybe just don't show up. Maybe you don't need to be there on Thursday. Maybe you don't need to pre-ride every single day. Why would you change if you feel competent racing 90% of the year by doing a pre-ride on Friday or the pre-ride the day before your race and race day? Why would you all of a sudden go 4 times for a course that's just going to change as more people ride it?
You
I
shouldn't.
think right. This is probably going to be the most important
Yeah, you
point
shouldn't.
that I think we make in this podcast, and we've been saying it to each other.
And
Don't go to the
let me hop in
venue.
there. Right, and within that, like when what you're saying, like be focused about your approach when you pre-ride, but also be focused when you pre-ride. I get so frustrated
Yes.
when people turn their pre-ride into social hour. It's like you're riding 4 wide on lines you'll never ride, just talking, not paying attention. And again, like we're saying it's just a normal day of riding, but it's also a normal day of doing your very best. So invest in looking at the freaking course.
Sure. If you're going to pre-ride with someone, it's because you can learn from each other, not because you want to catch up.
Well, here's where you might have to do something different, and here's where it's not a normal day, because the national schedule isn't a normal schedule. And we all have our regional schedules, and like, here in New England, we have a protocol that they use in lots of other places now, but we're able to pre-ride between events, and we count on that. And we build our warm-up schedule around access to the course. Well, at nationals, you're not going to have that. Set warm-up windows. You can't get on the course between races. So you have to study that schedule and say, when are my chances to see the course? And in
And
those
the window
windows
is
where I can
packed.
see the course, right? So when it's open, am I going to be able to do a workout? Or am I only going to be able to, is it going to be a parade, right? Am I just going to be riding around on the course in a parade because it's packed with other people, and all I'm going to be able to do is look at it and not do a workout on it? So I think we're moving pretty quickly into like the pre-ride aspect, and this, like, these are all connected, and I think it's okay if we skip around. But I think what we all agree on is resist the fear of missing out. It's okay not to be at the venue. avoid being at the venue if you can. Save that energy. Go to a movie. Do something. Sit home with your laptop. Anything but go to the venue and get drained. We all agree that it's nice to know the track. You want to be able to have it somewhat memorized in terms of where the turns are and where it goes. But the lines are going to change every single day. It's not necessarily going to be helpful for you to have memorized line choices. It might be helpful to just remember where the turns are. But if you're on a recovery day, if you're resting, let's say you're on a typical routine of resting 2 days before and opening up the day before and then racing, you don't need to be at the venue. You don't need the venue to ride 2 days before.
Yeah. Because
it's central nervous system drain, right?
Yeah. You're nervous. All that input from the people around you and seeing other riders who may be in the same race as you doing something different, then you start questioning your plan, your preparation, everything like that.
Right.
And to take all of that out of the equation is the best thing.
How often do you pre-ride the day before a course? Maybe for UCI races if you're traveling and you're there and you have to ride. But half of that is because you're an elite rider who got on a plane and you have to ride somewhere and you're at the venue, so you ride the course. Not because you did that on purpose necessarily.
Yeah. But
you got to understand the rhythm
and stuff come just before the race. But I think that a lot of the psychological, the big psychological component of this is like, you can't just wait till you're at the venue to implement these types of things. This has to be a lead-in strategy, right? And thinking a week to 2 weeks out of how you plan out your training. It's different in terms of like execution, where you might be doing the same workouts, but the intent is different. It's not about pushing. It's about moderation. Finding out like, hey, here's one day where you can let it fly for a minimal amount of time. And here's where we want to do our mediocre check-in, where we just go like, yeah, all systems are go. This works. That's enough. That's what I need to know. And so that way you kind of get into the mindset of just enough, just the minimum effective dose leading in order to maintain that bandwidth.
This is something Al talked to me. Sorry, Adam. Al was always pushing. And he probably said the same thing to you, Hyde. It's like, don't set your best numbers in openers. Don't set your best numbers in the midweek workout. Like, you will wreck your nationals.
We're indoctrinated.
You can spend your peak the week before nationals and feel like garbage on the race day.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
if you spend that, like, if you are peaked, you can ruin your legs much quicker.
So I was going to say, you said exactly that to me when I won Pan Ams in Texas before Chicago, where I absolutely crushed the weekend before nationals and was setting my best numbers and definitely rode too hard in the warm-up race there and won Pan Ams, but then was not recovered from that. I was so fresh and so peaking. And as a fast twitch athlete too, I absolutely just destroyed myself. The phrase that I've been using with my athletes is, this isn't training. You are not trying to increase capacity with these workouts. You are not trying to get stronger or better. You are only trying to feel good and go home.
Yeah, it's about confidence building, right? And this is why I said in the beginning that some of the best things that happened to me were like sheer disaster leading into nationals, because it kept me from doing all this really dumb stuff. It kept me from just absolutely nuking myself on a Wednesday prior to the race. I can't do it.
Too, yeah.
You just gotta let me just get through this. I just gotta get there, and that's enough,
The key here is we all have to learn from we don't want to schedule in disasters for people to teach them that lesson, right? So
Hyde's like, learn to skateboard week before nationals.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Do a kickflip.
Right.
You'll be fine.
Everybody listen to Steven's practical lesson.
Al should the skateboard. All right, let's.
Well, he's the reason why we had to take skateboards out of the van, because he broke his ankle the week before nationals. So trips got a lot less fun because of you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Is this why we can't have nice things?
Yeah.
For the days.
I was like, maybe you should bird watch. That's safe.
For the days leading into the race, and I think this can still be useful to people, though I expect everybody should have a plan by now, but um, I think there's a couple different viable or successful approaches as to like what days you go hard and what you do. And I think what they boil down to in the end is like, how far out does your recovery start? How many days does that last? When you do start opening up, are you opening up? Like, what are the workouts that you're doing to open up? Are you doing 2 in a row and then a recovery? Are you including a race as part of your opening up? How many days ahead of the race? It's a little late to talk about that, but still probably useful for the future. And again, because this is universal, right? If you're any event you're trying to peak for, this all applies. This isn't just nationals. We're using nationals as the excuse to talk about strategies for peaking for whatever the event is that you're peaking for. That might be a little different if it's a 12-hour gravel race versus a 45-minute cyclocross race, but more or less it's going to be a similar lead-in. Are you resting 2 days before and opening up the day before? Or are you doing a workout 2 days before, resting the day before, going in recovered? And are you doing a different approach for different athletes?
Something I've done with a number of my athletes is, partly it's just driven by what they do in their life, is sometimes we try both. We try doing a workout on Thursday because Friday just isn't a practical day when they're racing on Saturday, or we try doing their opening up workout on Friday when they race on Saturday. And I find at all different levels, those are sort of realities athletes have to face. Like, for example, even at the World Championships level, there's a relay on Friday now that a lot of top athletes do, but some athletes have their target race on Saturday and some on Sunday. And kind of, I think, is what I've seen there is it can work, but it helps if you have the confidence from past experience doing that to know that you still have a good prep into your target event, right? You can open up a day before, you can open up 2 days before, but I don't know if I'd want to be testing that necessarily.
Yeah, you
I
should
keep
know
all
what
my
works for
athletes
you
on
as an
Nationals
individual. Right,
Yeah.
right.
That's right.
In the
That's where it should
past,
be just kind of best practices at that point.
well, for
Mm-hmm.
US, for the Masters in particular, there used to be a non-champ race on Tuesday, and the Thursday and Friday days would swap for Masters men and Masters women every year. And so for me as a Master man, there was sometimes my race was on Thursday, sometimes my race was on Friday. When my race was on Friday, I loved doing the Tuesday non-champ race as my last workout because I got to do a workout on the course in a racing situation with a little less at stake, recover on Wednesday, open up Thursday, race Friday. When my nationals was on Thursday, I wouldn't do the non-champ race because I preferred to open up the day before. But Al coaches some of my age group competitors, and he would often have them still do the non-champ race on Tuesday, rest on Wednesday, and race on Thursday. And that worked really well for them. I think it takes a lot of confidence and security
Mm-hmm.
to see your competitors doing something different from you or a choice that you don't want to make, and know that both things work or both strategies can be effective. It's like, Al, when you had athletes doing the non-champ race Tuesday and racing Thursday, what was your motivation there? Why did you think that worked?
Well, a lot of times, like, we wouldn't have a race, like they'd be a couple weeks out from their last race. And so if we had that scenario, then going into nationals stale wasn't very helpful. And the plan for those, like the prep race, was to not race 100%. So we had like shut it down kind of like markers where like you didn't get to do like a full nationals effort. Like you want to get out there, kind of like blow open all of your like maximal aerobic capacities and then kind of shut it down. So that, like, not that everybody would always listen to me, but that was the plan going in.
Right.
And
Ego is
Yeah.
a hell of a drug in that
Yeah.
Right. That's
scenario,
why I would be
right?
there and kind of regulating them to like settle down or kind of like yell at people if they start to. I saw them like going way too hard. They need the
Yeah.
regulator.
and
Well, I
one
think
of the perks of that too is I'm imagining you said do not go to the venue the day before your race, right? Like that's probably was a big
If they
draw. I
raced on
always
Tuesday, yeah.
I always
Yeah.
loved that when when there was an opportunity where you didn't have to go to the venue the day before your race. We were talking a little bit about this, about psychology. Like, I would just do a regular work day the day before the race and like not think about nationals.
Low stress. I like that.
It's
Yeah.
great to have something to occupy, something that feels productive and satisfying, like a work day, like answering emails.
Sure.
Yeah.
I would answer emails the morning of nationals. Like, just like, don't think about the event. It's just another day.
Right. I like to stress out and lay my clothes out on the bed several different times before putting them on and then taking them off again. But all joking aside, I think it's really important too to like when we talk about considering what is appropriate for an athlete leading in, you have to take into account their depth coming into it, right? Like there may be a situation
100%.
where this athlete just hasn't done enough training or racing to be able to do 2 hard days leading in, or they haven't done enough racing to even do 1 good hard day. They actually, part of the prep is having those days where they have a race scenario. So they're actually primed and they've actually had a race in that month leading into it, you know? So it's not the hardest thing they've done.
Yeah, it's like we always say, like the first objective of cross racing is being fit enough to handle the workload of the day, right? And it's also like expand that out. You got to be fit enough, and I would say well balanced enough or self regulation enough to handle the workload of cross week, right? And so, like what you're saying, like your depth of fitness going into nationals is critical. It's so crucial, and like how that Thanksgiving to nationals block is going in your personal life as well. Like were your kids homesick? Like were you outside in the sun at all? Right? Like, there's just so many things to layer into that to even decide like how hard to go and the frequency of that hardness leading up to your race. That's why you need a CycleSmart coach.
Yeah, well, I mean, you look at the breakdown of total hours on the bike on a single cyclocross day. Your race might
you
be
should
50
know
to
that,
60
right?
minutes,
Yeah.
but like all other time added up, you could still have another hour and a half of ride time.
Easy.
On a given day, on a race day. And like if you look at the heart rate profile of that, and out of that hour and a half, like 45 minutes or more is like tempo or higher, just because you're on the course. And so like you're doing a ton of hard work all day long.
It's
there's not a lot of easy.
And what's the weather? What's the weather the day of the race? That when you're trying to do the non-championship race, like are you standing in 20 degree? I mean, there's so many factors that make it very dynamic.
There's no recovery cyclocross ride, right? Like the thing that we try to say, like you can't. It's borderline impossible to do a recovery ride and a course inspection at the same time unless you're incredibly disciplined and prepared to walk to it. And then you have to ask yourself, well, is it useful? Is it effective? I think the Louisville course in particular, especially with the additions for this year, in order to ride that lap, you will have to pedal hard. And so if you want to just go look at it, and maybe we can segue into, what should you do with your open course time and what should you do apart from it? I know everybody's going to want to take a look at the track. So I have to get there on Wednesday to set up. I'm going to be there. I have to ride. It's going to be pretty irresistible not to go ride a lap, right? I want to see it. I want to see it as soon as I can, even though we just told everybody not to do that.
I can hide your bikes.
Yeah.
I get there.
And so I've told some of my athletes who do have to be there, they can just go look at it. They can walk parts of it, but they can't spend all day out in the cold at the venue or try to ride. If there's any torque required to ride something, then that's not appropriate for the recovery day, really. So yeah, for the time that you do have available, let's talk about what should we be doing in those windows. So we can use like the Masters Races Friday as an example. There's an hour of open course time midday on Thursday for athletes who are racing on Friday. There's end of the day course time. Some course time is designated tracks. So this is a challenge for some of the elite riders where if you're a 17, 18 junior, your race is at like 9 a.m., maybe earlier. I can't remember actually. But the only time the elite lines are open is at the end of the day on Friday. You can't ride them or see them before that. Previous experience says that they will actually police that and kick you off and not give you access to those pro lines until Friday afternoon. So now you have to ask yourself, is it worth doing your openers or course inspection at 5 o'clock on Friday if your race is at 8 o'clock on Saturday? I'm telling my athletes no.
It's low light too. I mean, you don't want to mess yourself up before you even have a chance to.
I think this is an example of waiting to race day. They're not going to ride those pro lines until the morning of the race because there's a huge open course time before their race early in the morning on Saturday, and they need to be up anyway. So I prefer for them to see what they can see in the middle of the day during when the blue course is open, even though they don't have access to the black lines. Just go get a feel for it. Do their opening up workout separate, probably off the course, on the trainer, on the road. And then morning of the race, they will have a sufficient amount of time, I think, to ride those pro lines. That's not ideal. I'm not excited about that. But the cost of only having limited recovery time between their openers late Friday afternoon and having to be up so early Saturday morning, I didn't feel comfortable with that. I had to make a call there, and that's what I picked.
And I think
Is there anything to add to that?
No, I think, I think that's the right call for another reason too, is we're in the time of year where the course often gets in a little bit of a freeze thaw cycle. So seeing those pro lines at 5 o'clock, if it's going to freeze overnight, they don't look the same at 9 a.m.
Great point.
Right? Cool. That's a different thing. If given the choice, I want my athletes to ride the course, pre-ride the course at approximately the same time of day that they're going to race at. And, with the caveat that doesn't mean that's what the course is going to look like. Weather changes day to day. But yeah, get on the course around the same time that you're going to race if you have the choice. And kind of not to counter your point, because I totally agree with you.
Well, you can counter it, though. I'm okay with that. Yeah.
Well, no, I actually agree with you, but there's different situations warrant different approaches. Another thing that I've done with masters athletes especially is making a decision to actually not ride the race the day of because it's too much mechanical stress, because they don't have someone washing their bikes for them, because they're going to have to wait for 40 minutes in a lineup to get to the hose.
I agree.
Yeah, Jacob mentioned that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I had the luxury of having someone to wash my bikes. It wasn't a big deal for much of my career, but if you don't have that, you have to be cognizant of how much energy that takes.
Well, and we don't ride the mud at Louisville.
To that point, Mike. I mean, that's a great point, because exactly what you and Adam are saying. It's like if you go out on Friday and rip your derailleur off on a pre-ride and you got to race the next morning, that's you don't want to go into the event fear based and be, this could happen, I shouldn't do it. But that's a real thing. Rip your derailleur off at 5:30 the night before your race. That's not a great spot to be in.
Rip it off at 9 a.m.
Yeah, got all day to work with.
But I will let me use that to say, if you haven't taken care of this yet, you better have a couple of spare derailleur hangers in your box. You better have a bunch of chains. You better have some quick links. If your
bike's gonna break, it's gonna do it at nationals.
Yeah, whatever you should have. Was that it? I'm still not over it, guys. I do have. Not only do I have fresh pedals, I have brand new pedals as my spare pedals this year. I couldn't be more prepared. But still, anything can happen, right? You can just get a flat on a brand new tire. Shit happens. That's true. But all that stuff. Do you have tires? Did you bring spare tires? Whether you're riding tubeless or tubular, do you have all your backup stuff? So that's a degree of preparation that maybe you don't normally do, that you've invested so much in nationals. Yeah, you want to have those bases covered for sure.
Good equipment prep can make a impossible situation just an annoying one.
But I think to the point to tie up that sometimes pre-riding in really difficult conditions is counterproductive, right? Unless you have the help to do it. Mm-hmm. But also physiologically, it can be counterproductive, because if you have a track that's really difficult to ride just to complete the lap, do you have the fitness to do the course inspection in those kinds of conditions, or are you better minimizing your time out there? Hey, I've seen it once. my stuff is tight, everything's clean, I'm going to warm up on the trainer instead. That's a viable option.
So,
And speaking of keeping things like tight and efficient on there, I think one of the, I mean, I like to think a little bit out of the box in terms of like what you look at when you get to the course. And speaking of tight time frames to be on there with a lot of people, I think one of the mistakes a lot of people make is they follow the person in front of them. They're on the brown line immediately. And I think that's one of the things that served me really well over the years is I get off the line. I go and find all the crappier spots. I ride on the side of the course. If I only have a limited amount of time, I will know right away when I get on the course what the burned in lines are because the lines are burned in. I don't need to ride them. I want to know what else is out there so that I can make different decisions based off of that information. I don't need to know what everyone else is doing. I'm going to figure that out on lap one.
Even my 9-year-old says, Papa, don't ride in the brown stripe. I couldn't believe it. So
Find
that
the bumps
message is
are.
getting through. Yeah, it's hilarious.
Let me throw this question
Yeah.
out to you guys, like kind of adjacent to all this, like the course is nasty, looking at different things, blah, blah, blah. Like, so how do you guys, in the context of like managing your energy, right? Where do you guys land on like, hey, it's a pretty gnarly day. Like it's not easy to get around the course. Why don't you go watch some sections? Why don't you go do some peer review and download that?
Absolutely.
Like where do you guys land on that? Like pulling that thread for a second. I think that can be really helpful for people.
Yeah. On those days where athletes want to get on the course and it's really not necessary, I think that's a great time to do that. You know, spend 45 minutes or something, just kind of find a spot, watch a few things, take notes for the next day. That's
as opposed to doing
helpful.
it themselves, as opposed to riding and re-riding themselves. Like let someone do that pedaling for you and observe.
Yeah,
for sure.
Outsource your recon.
And I think the other thing to note is you don't have to stop doing that when the race starts. You can learn the course as you're racing. The amount of times that I thought I had a line and then you ride behind someone in the race and you go, oh, okay, I'm going to take that line now. That's no problem. Don't feel like everything has to be 100% dialed in when you line up because it's changed from when you pre-rode it. It's going to continue changing through the race. You're going to do 6, 7, whatever amount of laps. You can perfect your lap over the course of that. Just from learning from other people. Yeah.
A good thing to do with your time the week before nationals is watch all the previous editions of the race on that course too, because you can see like lines and features and kind of what happened in past editions, and it's like a no stress cost. Also good to do on your trainer if you're bored and the weather's not good.
I think in this case we didn't have I don't think we have video from last year, right? We didn't, or did we? I can't remember now. I've been looking.
There is video.
Right, but they only did it for the elites, and that's the same for this year. So for 2018, with the course changes this year, the video of the 2018 race is more useful because they've added some of the sections back in that we used in 2018. So that video is helpful, and I've been focused a little more on that. But of course, it makes sense to go back and look at last year's video too. But we do have the benefit at this venue of previous editions for sure.
I'd go back and like watch all the USGPs too, because they're just good coverage and good races to see what can happen at the venue.
It's amazing the amount of times, and I see this all the time now that I'm on the sidelines watching, that you watch the best riders do the simplest thing on course, and then as you get further back the field, you watch the less powerful, less skilled riders try to do more complex things, and they just don't realize it, right? It's like you watch and it's like, oh, Wout and Matthew or whoever are just running this section and they didn't think twice about it. And then in 30th place, everyone's trying to ride it and messing it up and missing the rut and all these complicated things. So there is a lot of merit to just watching and just simplifying too.
I'm going to put you guys on the spot as our wrap up here. I didn't warn you about this, so I apologize. If I was going to go to each of you and ask you for like one tip, one important thing that's on your mind that you've been saying to your athletes that you'd want to share, what's the one thing that you would leave folks with here leading into nationals? And
dude, that's so easy.
Yeah, okay, good. You first, Jacob.
Yeah, like you got to win the fun contest. If you go there and you're psyched to be there and you enjoy being there, you're gonna like you got to win the Stoke contest. And as hard as the weather can be, the course can be, the competition can be, like if you're there simply enjoying yourself, like it's going to feel warmer. Steven's catastrophes aren't going to be that catastrophic. Like the race is going to be shorter. Like it's if you just go there with the mindset of like I'm going to have a fun time here, then you're going to execute at the level that you need to execute at.
Will you just say that to me like over and over again this week?
Sure,
Like,
hire
can
me.
you remind me
You
of
can hire
that
me,
on
absolutely. Yeah,
Friday morning,
I'll send you the
please?
Cycle Smart rates, and you can decide
Yeah.
which level you want to come in at.
You're probably
I'm
HC, aren't you?
I'm very deep in a do as I say, not as I do mode for nationals. I am
Yeah,
struggling, but yeah.
all the work
Al,
has
let's
been
go to
done.
you.
You
Oh,
are
sorry. Go ahead.
I gotta like you've baked the cake, right? Like nationals or your last race of the year is just the icing. Well, like other than Steven, nobody eats just icing, but you can eat a cake all year long, right? You've baked the cake. Nationals is just the icing. Like, go have fun with it.
Yeah.
I'd say don't change your process for this event. Yes.
Even if your process is bad, just stick with what works.
Yes.
I mean,
If that's what
I'm
you,
only
yeah,
half. Yeah, I'm
if
only
that's
half
what you
kidding.
practice, like just trying, like throwing new things at a big
Yeah,
event
that's
is a
right.
bad idea.
Yeah, it's a run what you brung kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, I know it sounded like I was making a joke, but I actually think like nationals isn't the time. He's right. Like nationals isn't the time to do something different, even if it maybe would be better. Don't change things for nationals.
Yeah.
Jordan, you want to go next, or
Oh,
Mike?
JV's going next. Sure, I'll go
Yeah,
next.
go ahead.
Sort of building on what Jacob was saying is just knowing that you trained for this, you prepared for this, you are ready for this, and you're enough. You don't need to be anything special for the national championships. Just be you and do you.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, the biggest thing you can do is surround yourself with positivity during the day. Think positively, listen to music that makes you positive, those things. And what I've been saying to my athletes is just, create that positivity bubble around yourself. You want to bring as much confidence and good, even though I hate the word vibes, good vibes into the race. You want to will this good performance into existence. So just feeling good, positive, in control, and knowing that you've done this all season. So this is just another race and you can do it.
Steven?
I have two things.
Nope, one only.
One
Question was
is
one.
when you're at the venue, if you feel pressure, stop for a minute and take a look around. And I say this to, when I was on when working with the national team at World Championships or World Cups, is you should always take a minute to be by yourself and look around and pay attention to the what's going on at the venue, because it often, we've talked about nationals being a different scene, a bigger scene. It can be really overwhelming, and often it can just be this wall of sound and texture. And it's really helpful to stop and see what individually makes up what you're doing, right? Like, be excited that you're at a cool venue with lots of people, and watch spectators and see how excited they are, and know that it kind of means a lot to a lot of people and not just you. And I think that can help kind of ground you for what you're doing. And the second thing is, it kind of is time to be a hero for yourself. It is time to throw that fear of losing out the window. You just have to have a plan to do it. You can't be a hero in the wrong spot. And I think that's what tanks a lot of potentially good rides.
Forcing it.
Forcing it when it shouldn't be forced. There will be a time and a place to use that extra energy that you need to spend to make happen what you want to have happen. It just needs to be, you need a plan for it. It can't be at the wrong time. or the race isn't going to work out how you want it to work out.
Yeah. I would say, I think we're almost like, we've all said almost the same thing. Our tip is the same thing that I'm going to say. And I like, in part, like parts of what each of you said, but for me, it can get summarized as like, to just show up and express yourself. Bomb all lines is a phrase I like from Wild Style, where he talks about, like, I didn't show up to go to Paris. I didn't show up to be in galleries. I showed up to bomb, to do graffiti on every train for its own sake. Basically, it's like a love of the game expression. And so Nationals is an opportunity to be yourself, to ride the race that you're capable of and accept whatever that is, to just show up and express yourself. And I think if you can stay focused on that, you can be happy with the outcome, whether it leads to a jersey or a good performance or not. If you can stay focused on the process and detached from the outcome, which is very difficult at Nationals if you're in contention for a jersey. It's such a paradox where, in order to succeed in your outcome goal, you have to let go of it and stay focused on the process goal and the execution, while also, as Stephen said, look for that opportunity to do something special. But I think the way you get to that special performance is to have a normal day, to do your best, to be yourself, and express yourself. I think I want to thank you guys all for that. And I think for me, the best way to wrap it up is, I'm self-coached. Where you hear some of the other coaches talking about working with Al, and Al coaches Mike and has coached Steven and coaches Jordan. Jacob and I were professional teammates. Al and I were professional teammates. We've all known each other for a very long time, and there's a certain amount of group coaching
We were also
that
professional
happens.
teammates.
Yeah. So I am not exactly self-coached. I have a team of coaches. I am sitting there listening to the tips that they are providing with you, and I'm nodding because I'm thinking, right, I have to do that. That's exactly the advice I needed right now. Like, I am taking that advice as well. And even though I'm responsible for a lot of athletes who are going to be racing, I am also an athlete who's going to be racing, who really appreciates hearing things I already know, the way I hope that the folks listening to the podcast will also appreciate. So thank you all for that. And if you're listening or watching, thanks for tuning in. I hope this is helpful. We'll do our best to answer questions in the comments, especially leading up to Nationals. But of course, I hope this podcast continues to be useful for you for years and years to come, and leading into any event that's important to you. Or, to be honest, an event that isn't important to you. It can be applicable to any race weekend that you want to both have a good time and a good performance, and learn how to emotionally regulate around your preparation and performance. So thanks, everyone.